Well, this is another video for the those of you interested in the topic of UFOs, or now UAPs if they have come to be referred in the media, which I think is unidentified aerial phenomenon. This is an encyclopedia of flying saucers, and the spelling on this is really important. The encyclopedia spelling, I believe, uses like the archaic or the I think an older spelling. Encyclopedia is P-A-E-D-I-A at the end. And that's important because if you go to look this up, if you search it encyclopedia, the traditional modern spelling, you're not going to find this. But an encyclopedia of flying saucers by Vernon Bowen. And this is so anyway, I'll get into what it is here in just a second. But first off, this reprint, this came out in copyright of 2007. And this is a curious book because I stumbled onto this at Half Price Books, as fate would have it. And I don't think this is incredibly rare. This is one, though, that at one point I did look it up and it was going for some insane price. And I think I lucked out because whoever filed this at Half Price Books searched encyclopedia, probably when they were looking up a price on Amazon, and not encyclopedia, this spelling. And I got it for just a mere few dollars. So anyway, that's one of the funny things about with Half Price Books and some of these used bookstores around the country is, especially when they find banned books, like books that like Amazon is trying to completely suppress, they use Amazon as a means of determining their pricing. So if it's been purged from Amazon, then they don't find a price, then they just wing it. And sometimes you can find some pretty exciting literature for a paltry sum. So anyway, this is from 2007. And Vernon Bowen originally wrote this, I think, all the way back in the 50s, compiled all of this. And I apologize for time's sake. I'm probably not going to be able to rattle off all of the proper dates on this. Some of them are somewhat critical to this, but I believe it was his son that received this manuscript. He had sent off his original manuscript to the Air Force, and again, I'm gonna say either late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there. And the Air Force held on to his manuscript, and his family, I don't think, knew that he had submitted this to the Air Force. Basically, wanted his approval. He wanted to make sure, as a patriotic American, that he wasn't violating any security or disclosing anything of national security in writing this book. Well, his son didn't get this back until after his father's death, and he received this just out of the blue from the Air Force. I guess they were cleaning out their files, sent it back to him. And that's where they got their cover from, all of the markings from the original document when he got that back from the Air Force. And just real quick here, I'm going to see if 1959, I believe, is what I'm going to go with that. I might be off, but that's what it's saying on one of the original file copies there. But now, why I found this to be interesting is, and obviously his son and other researchers found this to be interesting, was that the Air Force had seen fit to hold on to this document for some, 40 years before turning this back over to his family. And then his son, of course, had it printed. And this is what I think you all will find interesting here. So he says up here, the individual pages were old, and a few pages, this is in the foreword, describing the whole story of how he got this manuscript back. It says the individual pages were old, and a few pages were described as fragile. Most of the pages, however, appear to be old but in good condition. Most pages were numbered at the upper right in green or black, in with a page number, with the lowest being 9 and the highest being 319. Significant was the fact that most of the pages were either marked confidential or top secret magic, stamped in red at the top and bottom, usually on the top of the typing on the pages. The top secret markings begin on page 221, the beginning of chapter, I believe that's 12, if I remember my Roman numerals right, titled The U.S. Air Force and Flying Saucers. Well, look at that. So that's a curious thing. And let me just double check, make sure I know my Roman numerals here. So the U.S. Air Force and Flying Saucers starts on page 131. And yes, that is 12, chapter 12. And I've dog-eared that page. And this is a very interesting chapter because it kicks it off by saying this line with wavering here and there, with deviate, he says, and in spite of contradictions, in spite of double talk, and in spite of seeming foul-ups in press releases, and in spite of seeming inconsistencies between stories issued by different branches of the services, the United States Air Force has hewed to a pretty consistent official line. This line, with waverings here and there, with deviations here and there, is as follows. So he's talking about the official party line about UFOs by the United States Air Force. 1, the U.S. Air Force does not know what the flying saucers are. 2, the Air Force has no evidence to indicate they are the products of a foreign power. 3, whatever they are, they pose no threat to the security of the skies of the USA. 4, the Air Force has never ruled out the possibility that, if they exist, they may drift in from outer space, although no tangible evidence exists to prove or disprove this idea. According to the Air Force, there have been no fallen saucers, no fragments, no little men, either dead or alive. Also, according to the Air Force, no good movies, no good still photographies of saucers exist. So he goes on to discuss the Air Force's attitude about this. But in this chapter, he's discussing again several possibilities about could the United States Air Force be directly related to the UFO phenomenon in any way. And given their treatment of this chapter, one is inclined to think that yes, they do. If there's not a whole lot in that chapter that I would say jumps right out at me as, and I'm going to reread it again and maybe post a picture if there's anything specific to this audience. But I think the curious thing in that broader picture there is that you have the Air Force holding on to a document, suppressing it for several decades, and their attention was focused solely on the chapter of the United States Air Force and its relationship to the UFO phenomenon, which, in my opinion, and again, this is my speculative take on this, is that supports my position that the UFO phenomenon is most likely one of psychological warfare. And again, as far as aliens go, I am an alien agnostic, don't believe or disbelieve until I see otherwise. But I think it's interesting to me. I went from the position back in 91 when I first really got into the whole alien thing to being a true believer in extraterrestrials. And you can see some of my previous videos where back in college I drove out to the perimeter of Area 51 when that was still a pretty radical new thing to do. And the deeper I got into this subject, the more of this literature that I read and compiled, and the more road trips I made to crazy facilities, and the more people I talked to, the more I came away with the idea that, yes, there is definitely something to the whole UFO phenomenon, but all of the evidence points in the direction of psychological warfare, and a psychological warfare with a lot at stake, more so than the idea that the United States government is hiding little green men or something like that. Now again, that could be the case. I don't have any evidence one way or the other as far as hard evidence, but I think it's real important to look at this as a psychological warfare effort and also keep looking for the other things as well. But it's fascinating to me how many times you see people with a direct ties to military intelligence being paraded out in front of the press or being coming out as whistleblowers or secret sources about certain things. Because the sole purpose of the intelligence community, especially the psychological warfare guys at Fort Now We Got You, or whatever that place is called down in Arizona, is that kind of disinformation, is deliberately creating these false narratives. I have an acquaintance that I have to be somewhat careful how I talk about, but this gentleman worked in military intelligence and had joked around with me about, we were talking about some of this kind of stuff, and he allowed us how one of his friends had actually helped create some of the fake truther websites, deliberately designed to kind of attract some of those people to those sites. And I had to hide my shock by that, because on one hand, having been studying a lot of this stuff, that's not that surprising, but for someone to just come out and admit, yeah, we've done that, that was shocking. So again, this is a fascinating book just because of its historical position on that, and the fact that the Air Force there's a very obvious paper trail of the Air Force showing very specific interest in that chapter. And that's where things get really complicated, which go way beyond the scope of this video, about the Department of Naval Intelligence and a lot of other branches of the service who might have been one of the reasons that got suppressed, not necessarily the Air Force. So anyway, I thought you all might find that interesting, especially with regards to all the disclosure stuff coming out right now. And one final comment on the whole UFO disclosure thing that seems to be kind of happening at a more rapid pace is, as another author, I can't take credit for this, pointed out, like Richard Doty is a great example. He was an OSI, Office of Special Investigations. I think he was enlisted back in the, worked for Kirtland Air Force Base. And he was the one responsible for feeding Paul Benowitz a lot of false information about the UFO phenomenon. And he was the one that actually brought in several high-level UFO, big-time UFO people like Linda Howe to show them alleged UFO documents about how UFOs were real and this really was extraterrestrials and all that. And he would let them see these documents, but they weren't allowed to take any notes or anything like that. They could just look at them, and then he would take them back from them. And he now admits to have been everybody knows that this guy was OSI, and he was deliberately putting out disinformation. But the funny thing about Richard Doty is he now claims, no, UFOs are real, but this time I'm telling you the truth. And the funny thing is, people who have talked to him have noticed that when you try to talk like exotic weapon systems, like other propulsion systems and things like that, like I've heard, the rumor is plasma propulsion is the big thing. And if you try to talk to him about those things, boy, he'll shut it down quick. Be like, nope, that's national security, ain't gonna touch that. But he'll talk all day about UFOs being extraterrestrials. So that's kind of funny. You would think somebody if anything was to be kept secret, and secret under the punishment of getting thrown in Leavenworth for a good long time, it would be disclosing secrets like about extraterrestrials. But alas, Richard Doty runs around the convention circuit talking about that, but again, still very tight-lipped about what would seem to be pretty prosaic aircraft secrets. So anyway, that is an Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers by Vernon Bowen. Fascinating book and fairly quick read. And again, if you're a UFO purist, I definitely recommend this. Just again, remember the spelling. I didn't misprint that in the title of the video.